I didn't cry when my dad died. It's not because I didn't care, it's because I had already cried for years. I cried on every birthday they forgot, every school event they skipped, every moment they made me feel like I didn't belong. My father was already gone to me, long before his heart stopped. Still, I showed up at the funeral. I stood in the back, just like always, watching my brother Daniel give the speech. Daniel, the perfect son. The one who could never do wrong. Everyone called him a fine young man that day. The truth? He was fake. Every smile, every tear an act. But my parents never saw it. They praised him, gave him everything, even when he didn't deserve it. I never got a thank you, even when I cleaned the house after Mom fell or paid for Dad's medicine when their insurance didn't cover it. But I was used to being invisible. That's why I nearly skipped the lawyer meeting. I thought, what's the point? I didn't expect anything. I went only because I was curious. Then the lawyer looked straight at me and said words I'll never forget. Actually, the true heir isn't your brother. Growing up, I was the second child, the quiet one. Daniel was born first and treated like royalty from the minute he opened his eyes. My parents gave him everything. Piano lessons, soccer camp, brand new clothes, the latest gadgets. I once asked for a new backpack, and my mom said, "Daniel needs one more than you." I got hand-me-downs. Not just clothes, but attention, love, even respect. When he got a C+ on a test, they blamed the teacher. When I got an A, they said nothing. When he turned 16, they handed him keys to a brand new car. When I turned 16, I got a used bike from a neighbor. I wasn't jealous, I was tired. Tired of trying. Tired of hoping they'd see me. But a part of me still believed, deep down, that if I worked hard enough, if I became something, they'd finally notice. I got into college on my own. Paid my own rent. Worked 2 jobs. They didn't ask how I was. But they posted Daniel's graduation photo like it was a national event. I should have stopped caring then. But hope is a stubborn thing. And it stayed with me, even when they didn't. As an adult, things didn't change much. Daniel stayed close to them, not out of love, but because he saw the inheritance coming. He managed Dad's hardware store, lived in the guest house, and acted like a prince. I lived in a small apartment 2 towns over. I visited when I could, but it always felt like I was interrupting something. Like I didn't belong in my own family. Mom would make a full dinner for Daniel. If I came, she'd say, "Oh, I didn't know you were coming. There's leftovers in the fridge." When Dad got sick, I visited the hospital every week. Sat by his side. Held his hand. Sometimes he'd wake up, look at me, and say nothing. Just blink. But I stayed. Daniel came once. Took a photo with Dad. Posted it online with a caption, "Cherish every moment with your loved ones." Then left. I knew he didn't mean a word of it. But people believed it. Just like our parents did. I remember thinking, this is Daniel's world. We just live in it. I felt like I was fading. Like I was slowly disappearing from a story I never really got to be part of. Until the day that lawyer spoke. The will reading was quiet and tense. I sat at one end of the long table. Daniel sat next to our mother, relaxed, confident. He looked like he already knew what it was going to say. Why wouldn't he? He had been their favorite for 30 years. He helped run the store. He handled the accounts. He smiled in all the family pictures. I was the shadow. The outsider. The one who never made it to the Christmas cards. The lawyer, a thin man in glasses, opened a folder and took a deep breath. "Your father made a change to his will 3 months before his passing," he said. Daniel smirked. "I'm sure it's nothing major. Just read it." But the lawyer didn't look at him. He looked at me. Directly. Slowly. Then he said it, "Actually, the true heir isn't your brother." For a second, it felt like no one breathed. My mother's eyes widened. Daniel's smile twitched. I blinked, unsure I heard right. The lawyer reached into the folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. "This was handwritten by your father, notarized, and witnessed. It overrides all previous versions of the will." Then he opened it. And what he read next changed everything. The room was silent, but my heart was racing. The lawyer cleared his throat and started to read. My father's voice came through the words, sharp, clear, and unlike anything I ever expected to hear from him. If you're reading this, then I'm gone. I've made mistakes, ones I can't fix now. But there's one thing I can do right. I always saw you, Elena. Even when I didn't say it. Even when I acted like you didn't matter. You were the one who showed up. You worked hard, asked for nothing, and still came back when I needed you. That's something Daniel never did. I looked up. Daniel's jaw clenched. My mother looked like someone had slapped her. Daniel is smart, yes. He knows how to impress. But I can't reward someone for wearing a mask. You, on the other hand, you gave without expecting. You showed love even when you got nothing in return. That's what a true legacy is built on. That's why everything I owned, the house, the business, the savings, all of it goes to you. The lawyer stopped reading. The words echoed in my mind like a fire alarm. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. Did I hear that right? Daniel stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. What the hell is this? He shouted. This is a joke. My dad would never do this. He loved me. He trusted me. His voice cracked, and for the first time in my life, I saw something I had never seen in him, fear. Real fear. The lawyer remained calm. Your father changed his will legally. Everything is in order. Witnessed. Signed. Notarized. This is final. My mother looked at me with disbelief, then turned to Daniel. Say something. Fix this, she whispered, like she was desperate to wake from a dream. But it wasn't a dream. This was real. And for once, I wasn't just the forgotten child in the corner. I was the one my father chose. The one they ignored. And now, everything they had protected for Daniel, every cent, every brick, every drop of their pride, was mine. I thought I would feel happy. But instead, I felt cold. Because the truth was, this wasn't just about money. This was about a truth none of them could erase. My father had finally seen me, but only after it was too late. The lawyer handed me the envelope. This is yours to keep, he said. I held it like it might vanish if I blinked. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from the weight of it all. The truth. The power shift. I looked at Daniel. He was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. You must have tricked him, he said. Got to him when he was weak. You manipulated him. I wanted to laugh. Manipulate? Me? I had spent my whole life being ignored. If I was a manipulator, I would have had a car at 16 and a full fridge growing up. I didn't do anything, I said quietly. He just finally saw what was always in front of him. My mother stood up, arms crossed. We won't accept this. We'll fight it in court. The lawyer shook his head. You can try. But this will hold up. Mr. Harris was of sound mind. We have video evidence, medical reports, everything. I didn't look at her. I just held the letter close. The letter that proved I wasn't invisible. Not anymore. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end. Daniel wasn't the type to walk away quietly, and I was right. I left the office without saying another word. My mom and Daniel stayed behind, whispering in angry voices, like plotting a storm. The parking lot felt like another world, quiet, empty, unreal. I sat in my car with the letter in my lap, reading it again. Word for word. Just to make sure it was still real. My father had written another line at the bottom. One the lawyer hadn't read aloud. I wish I had told you all this sooner. I just didn't know how. I hope this makes up for even a piece of what you went through. I felt tears coming, but I held them back. Because now I had to be strong. Stronger than ever. This wasn't just a victory, it was the beginning of a war. Daniel would come for me. I could feel it. I didn't know how or when. But I could see it in his eyes. He had lost everything. And men like him don't let go without a fight. I put the letter away, started the car, and drove off. I thought it was over. But it was only just beginning. Because what Daniel did next, no one could have seen coming. It started with silence. No texts. No calls. Nothing from Daniel or my mother for 3 days. And for a second, I thought maybe they'd accepted it. Maybe they'd finally seen the truth and decided to let it go. But I should have known better. With people like them, silence doesn't mean peace. It means planning. On the fourth day, I got a call from my old landlord. He sounded worried. "Hey, just wanted to let you know someone came asking questions about you. Said they were family. Wanted to know if you'd ever missed rent, if you caused problems, things like that." My stomach dropped. I asked, "Did he say his name?" There was a pause. Then, "Daniel. Said he was your brother." That was the moment I knew. He wasn't done. He was just getting started. And I had walked right into it. I'd underestimated him. I thought the will was the end of the story. But for Daniel, losing the money wasn't just a loss, it was an insult. One he wasn't going to forgive. And now, I had something he believed should have been his. That made me a threat. Not a sibling. Not family. Just a target. Later that night, I found out he had gone further. A friend from college messaged me out of the blue. "Hey, random question, did you really steal money from your parents once?" Daniel posted something weird. I checked social media. Sure enough, there it was. A post from Daniel, a long paragraph with just enough lies to sound real, and just enough truth to make people believe it. "It's been hard losing Dad," it began. "Even harder watching someone twist his final days for money. I'm not one to talk bad about family, but sometimes people you trust take advantage of grief." Thousands of likes. Dozens of comments. "You're so strong. I'm sorry this is happening. She always seemed jealous of you." I wasn't even tagged, but everyone knew. It was about me. And he knew it would get to me without having to say my name. I didn't respond. I didn't post anything. I just stared at the screen, feeling like the floor had been pulled out from under me. I had finally been handed a chance, a real chance, to step out of the shadow. And Daniel was already trying to drag me back in. The next morning, I got a letter. Not an email. Not a text. A letter. It was from a law firm. One I didn't recognize. Inside was a formal notice. Daniel was contesting the will. He claimed I had influenced our father while he was mentally weak. That I had forced him to change the will using emotional manipulation. I stared at the words, trying to understand how far he would go. He wasn't trying to win back the money. He was trying to erase me from the story. Erase the truth. Erase the fact that, for once in his life, he had lost. I called the lawyer who read the will. He sounded calm, but firm. "Don't worry," he said. "We've handled people like your brother before. His case won't hold up." But it wasn't the case that scared me. It was how personal this was becoming. This wasn't just about estate drama anymore. Daniel wasn't fighting for the inheritance. He was fighting to destroy me. And I wasn't sure how far he was willing to go to do it. That night, I started locking my doors. Checking the windows twice. Because something told me. Daniel's next move wouldn't be legal. The real clue came 3 days later. I came home from work and noticed the front gate was open. I always shut it. Always. Inside, nothing looked out of place except for one thing. On my kitchen table, where I left the letter from Dad, there was a single sheet of paper I hadn't put there. It read, "We both know you didn't earn this. Let's see how long you last." No name. No signature. Just those words. I froze. My hands trembled. Someone had been in my house. Daniel had been in my house. I called the police, filed a report. They said there was no sign of forced entry. Could be a prank, they said. "Do you have enemies?" I almost laughed. Do I have enemies? I share DNA with mine. I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. Daniel had lost the will. But he still had his pride. And now, he wanted to break me down, piece by piece. I sat in my living room that night, holding my father's letter, replaying every warning sign I'd ignored. I thought I had one. But Daniel wasn't finished. In fact, the worst part of his revenge hadn't even started yet. It began like a slow poison, quiet, invisible, but deadly. People stopped replying to my messages. Old friends cancelled meetups without explanation. Even my manager at work seemed distant, like she was watching me with new eyes. Then it hit me. Daniel wasn't just trying to scare me. He was trying to isolate me, break down my support system, make me doubt everything, everyone. The first real blow came from my aunt. She called one evening, voice cold, clipped. "I don't know what kind of lies you fed your father before he died," she said, "but you should be ashamed of yourself." I didn't even know what to say. I asked her what she meant, and she replied, "Daniel told us everything. That you manipulated your dad when he was sick. That you tricked him into changing the will." I felt sick. My aunt used to call me her little sunflower when I was a kid. Now she was speaking to me like I was a stranger. Worse, like I was a criminal. That's when I realized Daniel wasn't trying to win back the inheritance. He was trying to erase the version of me that deserved it. The version my father had finally acknowledged. That weekend, I went to visit a family friend, Mrs. Klein, our old neighbor. She had known me since I was 5. She used to bake me cookies when my parents forgot my birthday. I thought, if anyone would believe me, it would be her. But when I knocked on her door, she barely opened it. "Oh," she said, looking nervous. "I thought you were someone else." I smiled weakly. "Just wanted to say hi. It's been a while." She nodded slowly. "Yes, it has." There was an awkward silence. Then she said, "Look, I don't want to be in the middle of anything. I'm too old for drama." I asked her what she meant. She glanced around, then whispered, "Daniel told the neighborhood you're taking advantage of your father's memory. That you're suing your own mother. Is that true?" I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "No," I said. "I'm not suing anyone. I haven't even spoken to my mom since the will reading." But it didn't matter. The damage was done. Daniel had already told his story. And people had already picked sides. His side. Because he had something powerful, the benefit of years of being believed. Then came the final punch. A letter from my employer. A formal inquiry about serious allegations related to family misconduct and financial disputes that had surfaced online. My hands shook as I read it. I knew what this was. Daniel had taken it to the next level. He was trying to make me lose everything, my reputation, my job, my stability. I called my boss immediately. Tried to explain. She listened, but her tone was careful. Like I was a walking liability. "We're not accusing you," she said. "But when there's noise like this, we have to look into it." I hung up and stared at the wall. How had it come to this? How had I gone from invisible to hunted? And then, something in me snapped. I was done waiting. Done hoping people would see through his lies. Daniel wanted a fight. Fine. He was going to get one. But not the one he expected. I wasn't going to play his game. I was going to expose his. I started making a list: names, dates, messages, witnesses. Everything I had seen him do. Everything he'd gotten away with. And the first thing on the list. The secret he thought I'd forgotten. But I hadn't. Because a few years ago, I saw something I wasn't supposed to. Something Daniel had buried so deep, he thought no one would ever find it. But I did. And now, with everything he'd done to me, pushing me, threatening me, turning everyone I loved against me, I had no reason to keep it quiet anymore. If he wanted war, I'd give it to him. But it wouldn't be a screaming match or a social media meltdown. No. I was going to take my time. Build my case. Let him dig his own grave. And when the moment was right, I would let the truth do what it always does, destroy everything he built on lies. I stared at my wall of notes, took a deep breath, and made my first move. Because the secret I knew about Daniel. If I revealed it, he wouldn't just lose money. He'd lose everything. It happened 4 years ago, just after Dad had surgery. I was visiting home for the weekend, one of the few times I dared to step into that house anymore. Everyone was pretending to be cheerful, but I could tell something was off. Dad looked more stressed than sick, and Daniel? He kept whispering on the phone, sneaking off, and acting like he had somewhere more important to be. That Sunday, I was in the kitchen helping Mom with the dishes when I heard Daniel's voice in the living room. He was talking on the phone again, louder this time, not realizing I was just around the corner. "No, it's done," he said. He signed it. Said he didn't have the strength to read it, so I just told him it was the insurance papers. I froze. What was he talking about? I leaned closer, quiet as I could. "Yeah, I'll send you the bank info. Just keep your mouth shut. If anyone asks, say it was Dad's decision." My heart was pounding. When I walked into the living room, he was gone. But the words stuck with me. He tricked Dad into signing something. I didn't know what. But now I had a reason to find out. Back then, I brushed it off. I was used to Daniel's secrets. He always had schemes, jobs that paid too much, friends who suddenly disappeared, things that didn't quite add up. But this was different. This involved our father. And now, with the way he was attacking me, trying to destroy my life piece by piece, I knew it was time to dig into that moment I had ignored. I went through old files, papers Dad had left in the study. He had a habit of keeping things just in case. I remembered a brown folder labeled Legal, 2019. I drove straight to the house, half expecting Mom to slam the door in my face. But when she opened it, she just looked tired. No anger. No warmth. "What do you want?" she asked. "I need to pick up some things from Dad's office," I said. "They belong to me now. Legally." She didn't stop me. Just turned and walked away. As I stepped into that room, I realized it hadn't changed since he passed. The air smelled like dust and old coffee. I opened the file drawer. There it was. Brown folder. Legal, 2019. My hands shook as I pulled it out and flipped through the pages. Most of it was boring, medical bills, contracts from the store, old warranty forms. But then I found it, a document titled Authorization to Transfer Ownership. My eyes scanned the paper. It looked like it had been signed by my father. Only, the signature didn't look right. It was messy, almost a scribble. And the date. Just days after Dad got out of surgery. The document gave Daniel full control over one of Dad's retirement accounts. A big one. With a 6-figure balance. I looked at the bottom. There was no witness signature. No notary stamp. Just a single line scribbled by a man who could barely hold a fork at the time. Suddenly, everything made sense. Daniel had tricked Dad into signing this. Lied to him about what it was. Took the money and made it disappear. And now, with the will cutting him out, he was scared that secret would come out. That's why he was trying to ruin me. If I stayed quiet, he won. If I spoke, he fell. And now I had proof. I put the document in my bag, backed out of the house, and didn't say a word to Mom. She didn't ask what I found. But she looked nervous. That night, I couldn't sleep. I laid awake thinking about what this meant. I had power now. Real power. The kind that could ruin Daniel completely. I could go public. I could take it to court. I could even blackmail him, make him back off and leave me alone. But I didn't want revenge for the sake of revenge. I wanted justice. I wanted to stop being the one who got stepped on. And most of all, I wanted people to finally see who Daniel really was. I didn't care about sympathy. I didn't care if Mom cried or if the neighbors whispered. I just wanted the truth out there. I stared at my wall of notes, then added one more thing to it, a red circle around the name of the financial firm listed on that document. Tomorrow, I was going to call them. I wanted to know where that money went. I wanted a paper trail. And once I had it, I'd be unstoppable. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't know, was that Daniel had been watching me. And he wasn't going to wait for me to strike first. He was already planning something that could ruin me faster than I could ruin him. The next morning, I made the call. The number on the document led to a quiet, automated menu for a financial firm I'd never heard of. When I finally reached a human, I told them I was calling about my late father's account. They asked for his full name, birth date, and the account number. I gave them everything exactly as it appeared on the form. Then they paused. "I'm sorry," the voice said, "but this account was closed 3 years ago. Funds were transferred in full to a private business account." My heart dropped. I asked, "Whose business account?" Another pause. Then, I'm afraid we can't share that without legal authorization. I didn't need the name. I already knew. It was Daniel. He had stolen the money, hidden it behind some fake company. My dad never knew. And now, I finally had proof. But before I could celebrate, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. Is this Elena? A man asked. This is Detective Ruiz with the local police. We need you to come down to the station. You've been named in a fraud investigation. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. Daniel hadn't just seen me coming. He had struck first. At the station, everything felt unreal. Cold walls. Fluorescent lights. A detective sitting across from me with a file I hadn't seen before. He flipped through the pages like he already knew I was guilty. We received a tip, he said, that you may have accessed your father's accounts while he was sick. Possibly after he was declared mentally unfit. I blinked. That's not true. My father left everything to me in his will. He nodded slowly. We know about the will. But these transfers started before he passed away. And your brother claims he has voice recordings. I almost laughed. Recordings? Of what? Of you convincing your dad to sign financial documents. Telling him it was for his own good. I shook my head. That never happened. He was tricked, but not by me. I tried to explain the document I found. That the signature was fake. That Daniel had a pattern. But I could see it in the detective's face, he didn't know what to believe. I was just another story to him. Another mess in a family fight over money. You're not under arrest, he said. But we advise you to speak with a lawyer. This could go to court. My hands went cold. I walked out of the station and sat in my car for over an hour. My fingers trembled as I held the steering wheel. Daniel had done it. He'd made the first legal move. He had twisted the truth so hard, bent the facts just enough, and now I was under investigation. And the worst part? I knew exactly how it looked from the outside. Poor little second child inherits everything. Big brother is left with nothing. Then suddenly, Big brother starts talking about fraud, and a shady document shows up. It didn't matter that Daniel was lying. He had planted the doubt. And doubt is all you need to ruin someone. I wanted to scream. But instead, I drove home in silence. Every car that passed me made my skin crawl. Every time my phone buzzed, I flinched. I wasn't just being watched. I was being hunted. And unless I did something fast, Daniel wasn't just going to take back the money, he was going to take everything from me. My job. My name. My future. And if I didn't act soon, even the truth wouldn't be enough to save me. That night, I made one final decision. I wasn't going to hide anymore. If Daniel wanted war, fine. But I wasn't going to fight like him. I wasn't going to play dirty or lie my way through it. I was going to collect every piece of proof I had. I was going to build a case so airtight, even the lies he fed to the police would collapse. I scanned the stolen document, highlighted the dates, printed out the signature for comparison. I wrote down everything I remembered from that phone call years ago, the one I overheard. I started contacting Dad's old co-workers. I even found one man who told me, "Yeah, your dad once mentioned something weird. He said Daniel asked him to co-sign something but didn't explain why. It wasn't much, but it was a thread. And I was ready to pull it. Because I could feel it in my gut, Daniel thought he had buried me. But all he really did was dig his own grave. I turned off the lights, locked every door, and sat by my window all night watching. Waiting. Because I knew Daniel wouldn't stop here. His next move was already on the way. 2 days later, I received an anonymous email. No subject line. No message. Just a single file attached, footage_2019.mp4. I stared at it, unsure whether to open it. My first thought. A virus. My second. A trap from Daniel. But something about it felt different, less like a threat and more like a warning. I clicked play. The video was grainy, but the voices were clear. It was a hidden camera recording, facing a dining table I recognized instantly, our parents' kitchen. The timestamp read, August 14th, 2019, one day after Dad's surgery. I saw Daniel sitting at the table across from Dad. My father looked weak, his posture slumped, eyes glazed. Daniel slid a piece of paper in front of him. "Just sign here, Dad," Daniel said. "It's for your insurance." My breath caught. I remembered this day. I had been in the guest room. I had heard him whispering on the phone that evening. Now I was watching it happen in real time. Dad stared at the paper, confused. "Insurance?" he asked. "Didn't we already do that?" Daniel smiled. "This one's just an update. I'll handle the rest." And then, Dad signed it. Right there. On camera. The exact document I found in the drawer. My heart was racing. I paused the video, rewound, played it again, watching frame by frame as Daniel slid the paper into position. His voice was calm, polished, manipulative. The signature matched the one on the stolen retirement transfer form. This was it. The proof. The one thing that could end everything Daniel was doing to me. He'd told the police I manipulated Dad, lied to friends, co-workers, and family. But here he was, on video, taking advantage of a drugged-up man who could barely sit upright. And whoever sent me this, they knew exactly what they were doing. I scanned the email again. Still no name. No signature. No clue. Just the file. But I didn't care. This was my break. I called my lawyer that same hour. She watched the video, her face hard and unreadable. Then she said something I hadn't heard in weeks. "You've got him." My hands trembled as I clutched my phone. After everything, the lies, the smear campaign, the fake fraud case, this one clip could stop it all. But my lawyer had one warning: this video changes the game. But it's not enough to win unless we move smart. You need to prepare for his reaction. Because once Daniel finds out we have this, he won't back down. He'll explode. And he did. That night, my phone rang again. This time it was my mother. Her voice was sharp, breathless. "What did you do?" she demanded. "Daniel's furious. He says you've been spying on him. That you're faking videos to ruin him." I didn't even respond at first. I just let her keep ranting, listening to every word carefully. "You're destroying this family," she snapped. "He was right about you." I finally interrupted her, calm and cold. "I didn't fake anything. Dad was being tricked, and you didn't even notice." There was a long silence. Then she hung up. Just like that. No apology. No denial. Just silence. And I knew I wasn't just fighting Daniel now. I was fighting both of them. Because Mom didn't want the truth. She wanted comfort. She wanted the fantasy of the perfect son. And I was the threat that shattered that illusion. I stood in my apartment, staring at the empty wall. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. It wasn't even about justice. It was about truth. About finally being seen. I saved the video in 3 different drives, emailed a copy to my lawyer, and one to myself. If Daniel wanted to play dirty, fine. But I wasn't going anywhere. 2 days later, I walked into the police station with the footage. The same detective who questioned me before watched the video with furrowed brows, silent through the entire recording. When it ended, he looked at me differently. Not like a suspect, but like someone he'd misjudged. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "It was sent to me," I said. "I don't know who recorded it, but it's real." I recognized the room. The date lines up with the signature on the transfer form. "You can match it yourself." He nodded. "We will." This changes things. But even as he spoke, I knew Daniel wasn't done. He had lied to police, spread rumors, filed false claims. And now that the truth was surfacing, he would do whatever it took to bury it again. Even if it meant breaking the law. Even if it meant dragging me into the dirt with him. And I was right. Because the next day, I woke up to the sound of fists banging on my door. Then the voice, "Police, open up. We have a warrant." I hadn't even had time to breathe. But I already knew. Daniel had made his next move, and this time, he went too far. The banging on the door was violent. My heart pounded as I jumped out of bed, confused and half-dressed. "Police, "Open the door now," the voice shouted again. I swung it open, trembling, only to be met with 2 officers, stern-faced and already reaching for their cuffs. "Are you Elena?" one of them asked. I nodded, voice stuck in my throat. "You're under arrest. Step outside." My hands flew up. "Wait, arrest? For what?" But before I could finish, they were already pulling my arms behind me. Cold metal snapped against my wrists. "You're being detained on suspicion of identity theft and fraud involving a deceased individual," one said. "You have the right to remain silent," the rest of the words blurred. Neighbors watched from windows. A woman across the hall gasped. My entire body felt numb as they led me down the stairs like a criminal. Daniel did this. I had no doubt. He filed something, faked evidence, whatever he had to do to push me into a corner. And now, I wasn't just under investigation. I was in custody. My lawyer's number echoed in my mind as they shoved me into the back of the police car. My freedom, my name slipping away. At the station, they fingerprinted me, took my mugshot, and locked me in a holding room. I kept thinking it was a mistake, that someone would look at the file and realize it was all false. But no one did. Not yet. Hours passed. The room was cold, the lights buzzing faintly above me. I replayed everything in my head, the will, the forged signature, the anonymous video, the warning from my lawyer. We knew Daniel would strike. We just didn't know how fast. Finally, a familiar face entered the room, my lawyer. Her eyes were fierce. "They're claiming you impersonated your father to authorize a transfer 3 years ago," she said. Daniel submitted voice clips, screenshots of emails, and a signed affidavit. I leaned forward, panicking. "But I have proof. We have the video. The signature." He lied. She nodded, calm but sharp. "I know. But Daniel's smart. He preloaded the system. Filed fast, made it messy. Now we're in damage control. I'm going to get you out, but we need to act now." I swallowed hard. This wasn't just an attack. This was war. And Daniel had no limits. If I didn't shut this down soon, he'd bury me for good. By late afternoon, I was released on bail, barely. My lawyer worked fast, pulled the video, the signature comparisons, and even found a handwriting analyst to support our claim. But the damage had been done. News had already spread online. My mugshot was circulating. A headline read, "Family Inheritance Battle Turns Criminal, Sister Accused of Defrauding Father." I couldn't believe it. My name, my face everywhere. I sat at home in silence that night, blinds shut, phone turned off, staring at the TV with the volume low. I felt like a ghost in my own life. Every ring of the phone made my heart jump. Every sound outside made me think of the police coming back. And worst of all, my own mother hadn't called once. I was officially alone. But not defeated. Because I had something stronger than rage. Proof. And now, I had nothing left to lose. I opened my laptop, dragged the video file onto a flash drive, and stared at it. Then I pulled out my phone and recorded a message. Just a few words. Simple. Calm. Then I uploaded it to social media, public, with the video attached. Captioned, "The truth they tried to bury." Then I waited. And watched it all explode. By morning, it had gone viral. By sunrise, the views had passed 200,000. By noon, it was over 1 million. My simple post, just the video of Daniel tricking our father, with no added commentary, had caught fire. People weren't just watching it. They were angry. The comment section was a war zone. How could a son do this? This is elder abuse. She was arrested. Are you kidding me? Strangers were tagging news outlets, lawyers, even advocacy groups. One verified account tweeted, "This is why we record everything. Protect your parents from their own children." Another said, "That man deserves prison." I sat on my couch, phone buzzing every few seconds, stunned at how fast everything flipped. It was like someone had finally opened the floodgates. People believed me. Not just a few. Thousands. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the quiet second child. I was the truth teller. The survivor. But I also knew, This much attention would send Daniel into a frenzy. And I was right. Because within hours, he went from silent to screaming. He started posting everywhere his story, his version, his side. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. Daniel's first post was desperate, a long-winded explanation claiming the video was edited, that I was twisting things and seeking attention. He even posted a childhood photo of us with the caption, "I've always protected her. I don't know why she's doing this to me." But no one bought it. The comments turned against him immediately. "You protected her? Is that what this video shows? This isn't a misunderstanding, this is theft." Gaslighting 101. The more he posted, the worse it got. People dug up old photos, articles, even past job reviews from companies where he'd been let go quietly. One ex-colleague tweeted, "I knew Daniel years ago. He's exactly who she says he is." The internet had done what the justice system hadn't. They put him on trial. And they weren't holding back. I watched as his online support vanished. His carefully crafted image cracked wide open. All those years he spent being the good son, the family man, the responsible one, shattered in hours. But while social media cheered me on, I felt a storm rising. Daniel wouldn't take this lying down. And I knew the next time he struck, it wouldn't be online. It would be personal. And possibly dangerous. That night, I received a message from an unknown number. "You think you've won. But you don't know everything. You're not safe." No name. No context. But I knew who it was. Daniel wasn't hiding anymore. The public shame had pushed him over the edge. And now, I had to think 3 steps ahead. My lawyer contacted the police, submitted the video again, this time as part of a formal counter-investigation. We filed a motion to expose the retirement transfer and open a fraud case against him. But legal processes are slow. Daniel wasn't. That same week, my apartment was broken into. Nothing stolen, just drawers flipped, files scattered. The flash drive with the video? Gone. Luckily, I had 6 backups. But the message was clear. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about control. Revenge. Silence. And Daniel had no rules. I filed a police report. They dusted for prints. Nothing usable. Could have been random, one officer said. I shook my head. It wasn't. I started sleeping with a chair propped against the door, looking over my shoulder everywhere I went. Daniel wanted me scared. And it was working. But fear wasn't going to stop me. I still had more proof. And I was getting close to uncovering something even darker. Because in all his desperation, Daniel had left behind one mistake. And I had just found it. I found it by accident. I wasn't even looking for a new lead, I was trying to breathe. To clear my head. I opened Dad's old email account, one I'd almost forgotten he gave me access to years ago when I helped him reset a password. I figured maybe I'd find something: old bills, doctor records, more signed forms. Instead, what I found was a string of email notifications. All from a private banking service overseas. Each one was the same: your recent transfer of $5,000 has been processed successfully. The most recent one? Sent 2 months before Dad died. I opened the first email and stared at the name on the account. It wasn't Dad's. And it wasn't Daniel's either. It was some made-up name, M. Doyle. I almost closed it, thinking it was junk. Until I noticed the email address associated with the sender, danielharrisfinance@outlook.com. I froze. Daniel had created a fake identity, a shell name, and was moving money into a foreign account under it. My hands shook as I clicked deeper. He'd been doing this for 3 years. Quietly. Slowly. While living at home. While running the store. While smiling in family photos. And now, I had the digital proof. The timing lined up perfectly. The forged signature. The fake transfer paperwork. And now, the final nail, the secret account. My lawyer was stunned. "This is huge," she said. "This is organized financial fraud. Wire fraud. Tax evasion. Identity manipulation. If we can link Daniel directly to this account, it's over." But I was already a step ahead. I remembered something from years ago. A flash drive Daniel left plugged into Dad's home office computer. He used it to store passwords, backups, receipts. He bragged about how he kept everything secure. I never touched it. Until now. That same night, I went back to the house. It felt strange walking through the door, knowing Mom might be inside. But I was done tiptoeing. If she stopped me, I'd push through. This wasn't her fight anymore. It was mine. She didn't stop me. She didn't even speak. I walked straight to the office, found the flash drive exactly where I remembered. Plugged it in. And there it was. A folder called Project D. Password protected. I tried the usual, Daniel 123. No luck. Then I typed the name of the fake account M. Doyle. The folder opened. And inside. Everything. He kept it all. Emails, transfers, spreadsheets. A full money trail. Over $180,000, moved quietly in small chunks to the offshore account. He even had a document titled "In case of emergency," an outline of what to say if he was ever caught. He planned to blame me. Of course he did. It was all there in black and white. I copied everything. Multiple flash drives. Backed it up to the cloud. Sent it to my lawyer, labeled Endgame. This wasn't just inheritance drama anymore. This was a full-blown criminal operation. And Daniel was at the center. I should have felt relief. Victory. But all I felt was anger. How long had he been planning this? How long had he looked our father in the eye, smiled, and stolen from him behind his back? And worse, how long had our mother ignored it? Protected him? Enabled him? The answers didn't matter anymore. Because now, it was out of my hands. My lawyer contacted authorities. The case turned from civil to criminal within 48 hours. An investigation was launched. Daniel's accounts were flagged. And I waited. But Daniel didn't wait. The next day, I got a letter shoved under my door. No stamp. No envelope. Just a single piece of paper. 3 words. You will pay. The letter chilled me. Not because of what it said, 3 simple words, but because of how it got inside. No cameras picked it up. No witnesses. It was as if Daniel had walked straight through the walls, left his message, and vanished into smoke. I stared at the paper for a long time, then burned it. My lawyer told me to report it, but I knew the truth. Daniel wasn't warning me. He was spiraling. The fraud was exposed. The case was active. His carefully built world was collapsing, and he had nowhere to hide. That's when the calls stopped. The social media accounts went dark. His number went straight to voicemail. I even drove past the guest house he used to live in behind my parents' home. Empty. Curtains drawn. No signs of life. I called my mother. No answer. I called her again. Straight to voicemail. The 3rd time, she picked up and hung up without saying a word. Something was wrong. Not legally, emotionally. There was a silence that didn't feel like surrender. It felt like fear. Daniel wasn't fighting anymore. He was running. 2 days later, I got the call from the detective. We have a situation, he said. Daniel Harris missed his court summons. His house is empty, and his bank accounts were wiped clean 2 days ago. We think he's fled. I knew it. I just didn't know how far he'd go. That same day, I found a note on my windshield, under the wiper blade. My name written in red ink. Inside, a printed photo. Me, standing at my office window, looking at my phone. Taken from across the street. He was watching me. Even while he was supposedly on the run, Daniel was still playing the game. Still trying to scare me. Still trying to control the narrative. But this time, he underestimated me. I took the photo straight to the police. They scanned it for fingerprints. Nothing. They tracked the paper stock. Common. No leads. I sat in the station, staring at the evidence, when the detective said, "You know what the most dangerous kind of man is?" I shook my head. He replied, "The one who thinks he has nothing left to lose." I nodded slowly. That was Daniel now. And deep down, I knew this wasn't over. He wasn't just running from justice, he was planning his final move. Then the twist hit harder than anything before. That evening, I got a message request on Instagram. From an account with no name. No posts. Just one photo in my inbox. It was my father. But not just any picture. It was him in the hospital, weak and pale, taken the day he signed that forged document. And standing behind him was my mother. Smiling. Her hand on his shoulder. I stared at the photo for a long time, my heart thudding like a drum in my ears. My mother. Her hand gently resting on Dad's shoulder. Her eyes not on the camera, but on Daniel. You couldn't see him, but I knew. She was looking at him. Approving. Proud. Involved. That photo was never meant to be seen. It was taken at the exact time Daniel tricked Dad into signing the transfer document. The same day, I overheard him whispering about it on the phone. I had always blamed Daniel alone, his greed, his cruelty, his lies. But this photo changed everything. She was there. And worse, she didn't stop it. Didn't question it. Didn't protect the man she'd been married to for 3 decades. She let it happen. Maybe even helped. Suddenly, the pieces started fitting together. Her silence after Dad died. Her defense of Daniel. Her refusal to believe me, even when the truth went public. She wasn't confused. She was complicit. My stomach turned. All this time, I'd been fighting one enemy. But the real betrayal, it started with her. I drove to the house without calling. I didn't care what she had to say, I needed answers. She opened the door slower than usual, like she knew why I was there. She didn't say hello. Just stepped aside and let me in. The house smelled the same old carpet and fading flowers, but the air was different now. Cold. Heavy. I pulled out my phone, opened the photo, and held it up. Where was this taken? I asked. She looked at it. Didn't even flinch. You already know, she said. Why are you really here? I felt my voice rise. Why didn't you stop him? Why didn't you say something? You let him steal from Dad. Her face changed. Just a flicker. Not guilt, resentment. Your father didn't know how to handle money, she said sharply. Daniel was protecting the family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He wasn't protecting anyone. He stole. He forged a signature while Dad was drugged and dying. Her lips pressed tight. Your father was never strong. Daniel stepped up when no one else did. My blood went cold. Including you? I asked. Her silence was the answer. She didn't see Daniel's actions as a crime. She saw them as necessary. I backed away slowly, my entire body shaking. You helped him, I said, my voice low. You let him do this, and then you tried to bury me when I spoke up. Her eyes welled up for the first time. Not with sorrow, but with rage. Do you know what it's like to live with a man who couldn't make decisions? Who couldn't lead, she snapped. Daniel took control. He saved us from falling apart. You just left. You disappeared. I felt like the ground had opened beneath me. She didn't just stand by while Daniel stole the inheritance, she wanted it that way. I wasn't erased by accident. I was erased on purpose. I turned and walked out the door. She didn't try to stop me. Didn't say goodbye. As I drove away, tears stung my eyes, not because of Daniel this time, but because the one person who could have protected me from him was the one who handed him the knife. That night, I called my lawyer. We need to add someone else to the case, I said. My mother. She didn't even hesitate. Already ahead of you, she replied. Daniel might have run, but she's still here. And now that we know she was involved, she paused. She'll go down too. I nodded, staring out the window. But deep down, I knew something else. Daniel wasn't done. He wouldn't disappear forever. He would come back. And when he did, he'd have nothing left to lose. Which meant the next time I saw him, he might not come to talk. It happened just after midnight. I was half asleep on the couch, TV on low, trying to distract myself from the weight of everything, court cases, police reports, betrayal. Then I heard it. A soft click. Not from inside. From the back door. My body froze. I moved slowly, quietly, turning the volume down, listening. Another sound, bare feet on tile. I wasn't alone. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 immediately, whispering the address, but I didn't hang up. I crept toward the kitchen, heart thudding in my chest, phone shaking in my hand. Then I saw him. Daniel. Standing in the shadows like he belonged there. Same smug face. Same eyes. Only now, they looked different. Hollow. Wild. You ruined everything, he said, voice low, calm in the most terrifying way. You took everything I built. You turned the world against me. I didn't respond. I took a slow step back. My voice was calm but loud enough for the 911 operator to hear. Daniel, you need to leave. The police are coming. He tilted his head. You think this ends with lawyers? With courtrooms? He stepped forward. I held up the phone. They're listening. Right now. But he didn't stop. I should have done this a long time ago, he said. His hands were empty, but his words were sharp. You always thought you were better. Just because you played the victim. I blinked. I didn't play anything. I just told the truth. He laughed, cold, bitter. The truth. You think people love you now? They'll forget you the second this blows over. They always do. He took one more step. Then blue and red lights flashed outside. Tires screeched. Doors slammed. Voices yelled, hands where we can see them. Daniel didn't resist. He just turned to me, expression blank, and said one final thing. This isn't justice. This is revenge. Then they took him away. Just like that. Quiet. Controlled. But the echo of his words stayed with me long after the door slammed shut behind him. This isn't justice. This is revenge. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, watching the flashing lights fade down the street. The silence afterward felt heavier than ever. Like a final breath after drowning. But I knew better. This wasn't the end. Not yet. The next morning, the detective called. We've got him in custody, he said. And he's not talking. But here's the twist, you're not the only case. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? Daniel's being linked to 2 other fraud investigations in different states. Small businesses. Fake identities. He's been doing this for years. I sank into my chair. It was bigger than I thought. He wasn't just a liar. He was a career con artist. And somehow, my family had never seen it. Or worse, had chosen not to. The detective continued, this helps your case. But it also complicates things. He's lawyered up. His mother might too. His mother. Not mine anymore. I understood what he meant. My mother's silence had turned into survival. She was protecting herself now. Not him. Not me. Just herself. The betrayal stung less now because it was numb. I was too far gone to cry. Too close to the end to flinch. Daniel was behind bars. My mother was under investigation. The truth was almost fully out. But there was one last thing left, the trial. And I knew, when that day came, I would have to face them both. Not just in front of a judge, but in front of the entire world. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not the temperature, the energy. Silent. Tense. Like everyone inside knew something explosive was about to happen. I sat at the front, flanked by my lawyer and a man from the fraud investigation unit. Daniel entered through a separate door, in a grey suit 2 sizes too big, escorted by officers. He looked thinner, more tired, but his eyes hadn't changed. Still sharp. Still angry. Still dangerous. Then my mother walked in. No greeting. No eye contact. She took a seat behind Daniel, arms crossed, eyes forward. I was no longer her daughter. Just the reason she was sitting in that room. The judge entered. Court is now in session. The case had gone public weeks before. Reporters lined the back row. People watching online were calling it the inheritance scandal. But to me, it wasn't about drama. It was about truth. My lawyer stood first. Calm, professional, deadly. She presented the timeline, the will, the video footage, the financial records, the forged documents, and finally, the secret account. The judge listened carefully, occasionally raising an eyebrow. The room remained dead silent. Then it was Daniel's turn. His lawyer tried everything. Claimed the video was misleading. Said Dad was coherent enough to sign what he wanted. Blamed grief. Blamed me. Blamed the media circus. But nothing stuck. And then, finally, Daniel took the stand. He swore in, sat down, and for the first time, looked at me. His voice was softer now. Almost rehearsed. My sister and I were always different, he began. She resented me for how close I was to our parents. That resentment turned into this. He spun lies like thread. Called me vindictive. Said I was obsessed with being seen. That I only showed up again when money was involved. I stared straight at him, not blinking. Not reacting. Let him talk. Let him dig. Then my lawyer stood up for cross-examination. Mr. Harris, she asked, holding up a document, can you explain this wire transfer from your fake offshore business account, made under the name M. Doyle? Daniel froze. The room shifted. I don't recall, he said. She smiled. Would you like us to play the audio from the flash drive where you walk through this exact transaction? Silence. Then she leaned closer. Would you like us to ask your mother what she remembers? The judge leaned forward. Do you wish to respond, Mr. Harris? Daniel said nothing. His fingers gripped the edge of the witness stand. My mother's eyes finally met mine, just for a second. And in that moment, I saw something I never expected, doubt. Like she finally wasn't so sure anymore. The rest of the day moved in a blur. Lawyers spoke. Exhibits were entered. But I barely heard them. All I could focus on was the shifting energy in the room. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was undeniable. And Daniel. He wasn't the golden boy. Not the charming older brother. Not the heir. He was exactly what the evidence said he was. A thief. A liar. A man who sold his family out for control. When court adjourned that day, the judge didn't give a verdict. That would come tomorrow. But the look on the jury's faces said enough. Daniel's lawyer whispered something in his ear. His shoulders slumped. My mother left the courtroom without a word. I didn't chase her. I didn't need her validation anymore. I had survived without it my whole life. Tomorrow, it would be over. But that night, I stood in my apartment and replayed it all. The betrayal. The silence. The lies. And now, the fall. The courtroom was full. Not just with lawyers and family, but with eyes. Strangers. Reporters. Former friends. People who'd picked sides months ago and those who'd stayed silent. I sat still, heart steady, hands folded in my lap. After everything being erased, lied about, arrested, hunted, I wasn't scared anymore. Not of Daniel. Not of my mother. Not even of the outcome. Because no matter what happened, the truth was no longer hidden. The judge entered. The room stood. Then Saturday, has the jury reached a verdict? The bailiff asked. The foreperson stood. We have, Your Honor. The air tightened like a fist. I didn't look at Daniel. I didn't need to. I could feel him, tense, still clinging to the delusion that charm could save him one more time. But charm couldn't erase evidence. And it couldn't rewrite what he did to our father. On the charge of financial fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of elder abuse and identity manipulation, guilty. On the charge of attempted defamation and filing false reports, guilty. 3 words. Spoken 3 times. Each one heavier than the last. Daniel didn't move. His face didn't even change. But his hands. His hands gripped the table so tight his knuckles turned white. My mother gasped. Quiet. Sharp. Like the world had finally cracked open beneath her. She wasn't on trial, but in that moment, it didn't matter. She was part of it. She had watched it happen. And now, so had the world. The judge spoke next. Mr. Harris will be remanded into custody and sentenced next month. Due to the seriousness of the charges, bail is denied. The gavel hit. Just once. And it was over. Years of manipulation. Gone in a single moment. Afterward, people came to speak to me. Apologized. Congratulated. Reporters called me the forgotten daughter who exposed the golden sun. I didn't care about any of it. I didn't want fame. I didn't want pity. I just wanted peace. I stepped outside the courthouse into the sunlight. It felt warmer than it had in months. I closed my eyes and breathed. Really breathed. For the first time in a long time, I was free. The house was mine now. The business too. But I didn't rush to sell or celebrate. I walked through it one last time, quietly. Each room told a different story. Of things said. Of things never said. I stood in my father's old office and whispered, "I wish you could have said it yourself. But I heard you anyway." Then I locked the door behind me and walked away. Daniel went to prison. 3 years, no parole. My mother disappeared from public life. Moved somewhere quiet, alone. She never apologized. She never reached out. But that was her burden to carry, not mine. As for me, I didn't spend the money. I didn't flaunt what I'd won. I went back to work. Built a life for myself, not on revenge, but on truth. And sometimes, when people asked me how I found the strength, I told them this. When they try to erase you, make sure they live to see your name written in bold. And that's how the forgotten daughter became the one they couldn't ignore. Betrayed by blood. Framed by family. But in the end, she didn't just survive, she won. If you found this story gripping, imagine what's coming next. Because we've got more real, twisted, and unforgettable stories every single week. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications so you never miss a moment. Like if you believe truth always finds a way. And drop a comment below, what would you have done in her place? Until next time. Watch your back. Even family has secrets.